Welcome to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. Do you wonder how your faith fits together with your profession? Well, join us as we explore how to live well at the intersection of two roads crossing.
Hello and welcome to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. My name is Barry Schwenk. I'm a veterinarian, a pastor, and your host. In addition to all those other things, I have to confess, I'm also a little bit of a workaholic and also a perfectionist. So that makes it pleasant, right? Unfortunately, both of those things have seeped into my professional life and even my faith journey. If you're anything like me, you probably struggle with the same kinds of issues and the pressure of trying to do everything right in every aspect of your life. And to be honest, that leads to a lot of problems. For a long time, I didn't quite understand how to be a good follower of Jesus and also how to be a good veterinarian. It was like there were two separate boxes in my life. There was this tug of war going on, and it really created a lot of anxiety. There was a lot of disconnect. I wanted to do everything right, but it felt like I was traveling down two different roads at exactly the same time. Well, it's been more than 20 years in this profession now, and 16 of those years I've been serving with the Christian Veterinary Mission. And during that time, I've come to realize that I'm not alone. There are a lot of you that have the exact same problems. There are many of you that are out there that are asking the exact same question that I've been asking over and over again, which is, how do I live well at the place where these two roads in my life cross? I think maybe the first time that I asked this question was actually as a teenager. I was 12 years old when our family moved to Zaire, which is now the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, my parents weren't classified as traditional missionaries. My dad was a bookkeeper. My mom was a school teacher. Their job was actually to do the purchasing and the accounting for all of the real missionaries. And those real missionaries were preachers, pastors, church planters. As a kid, I was kind of on the sidelines, and I got a chance to watch an awful lot of ministry life. I got to observe a lot of things. And I remember thinking that there was this weird disconnect that was going on. Because as support missionaries, there wasn't a lot of expectation for sharing the gospel. But my parents, as they engaged with people within the community, as they helped folks to navigate the struggles of their lives, they actually had lots of opportunity to share the gospel. It was almost as if the real missionaries who would head off into these remote areas to preach and have revivals and leave, it was almost as if they were making less of a kingdom impact than these support missionaries who were busy not doing traditional missionary work, but visiting sick families, giving rides to people to the market, or even just inviting people over for dinner. I remember thinking, there has to be a way where you can share Jesus and also live real life at exactly the same time. But finding out the acceptable way of doing that was really hard. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, we didn't have internet access. What I was left with was whatever I could access that was immediately around me. And unfortunately, most of the people that were around me had this same clear distinction or separation of roles that I had been observing. Missionaries were pastors, missionaries were preachers. Everyone else just worked to support them. To that end, it meant that where the missionaries, where the preachers and the pastors were sharing the gospel, there was no expectation of anyone else to do that. There was this idea that support missionaries couldn't do that. So how do we as followers of Christ make a kingdom impact if it's only limited to those who are in purely defined pastoral faith roles? It really kind of stumped me a little bit, because what I was observing in my parents would suggest that it is possible to meld your profession, to mold your vocation and your faith together to the glory of God. Well, it took me a while to kind of sort through these things, but eventually I found what I was looking for. And oddly enough, it was kind of in the Bible. It's probably a good place to be looking, right? It was in John chapter 11. And in John chapter 11, we read a story about Jesus raising his good friend Lazarus from the dead. If you've been around Sunday school for any length of time, you've probably heard this story before. I remember seeing pictures of it and reading about it, coloring pages in Sunday school. But the real depth of this story really didn't impact my life until that first year in college, when, as I was reading it, it was like a light bulb went off and something new was stirring in my heart. And so you have to bear with me for a moment. I'm going to let a little bit of my inner pastor out in this, okay? But in John chapter 11, Jesus is actually modeling for us the perfect example of service. See, in John chapter 11, in the very beginning, Jesus tells us that Lazarus's sickness is not going to end in his death, but it's going to end with God's glory. And sure enough, that's exactly what happens. At the end of the story, it says that many who saw what Jesus did, many of them believed. Okay, I get it. True service results in meeting the spiritual needs of the people around you. Well, that's what I'd observed all this time. You know, pastors and missionaries and preachers, that's their job, right? To meet the spiritual needs of the people around them, just like how Jesus did. But Jesus didn't stop there. That wasn't the totality of how Jesus met people. Jesus also met the physical needs of people. And in this story, we see that illustrated with Lazarus, right? Lazarus had the greatest physical need of all met, which was he was dead and he was alive again, right? Now, in the story, Jesus didn't meet all the physical needs of Lazarus. He didn't even meet all the physical needs of all the other people in the story. It just says that Jesus met the most pressing physical need of Lazarus and brought him back to life. I actually love verse 39, and I don't normally read the King James Version as much anymore, but I love the King James Version of verse 39, because in that verse, after Jesus tells the funeral onlookers to roll away the stone from the tomb, Lazarus' sister says, "Lord, he's been in there for 4 days. Surely he stinketh." You only get that word stinketh in the King James Version, but it's well worth the read, in my opinion. And this is the thing here, is that Jesus met the need of Lazarus in that not only was he raised from the dead, but even the stench of death was taken away from Lazarus. It's pretty complete. But Jesus also didn't stop there either. Not only that, but in verse 35, one of our favorite, the shortest verses of the Bible, right? As a kid, if you had to learn a new verse, you wanted to learn John 11:35, because it's Jesus wept, right? But why? In John chapter 11, why did Jesus weep? Was it because he didn't know what was going to happen next? Of course not, because in the very beginning of the chapter, he told us what was going to happen. Jesus wept as he looked around at all the sorrow on the faces of all the people that were there at the funeral. Jesus would not only meet the physical and spiritual needs, but he would also meet the emotional needs of the people that were there. And there it is. That's the picture. That's the example that I've been looking for my whole life, right? If I was going to be a good follower of Jesus, then I needed to serve others the way that Jesus served. I would need to be intentional about addressing the spiritual, the physical, and the emotional needs of others. I couldn't do just one. If I wanted to be like Jesus, if I wanted to follow in his footsteps, I had to grow and be intentional in all three. But how? How exactly do you do that? And as I thought back to that time in Zaire, I remember all that time that I spent with my friends. We used to wander around over hill and dale, talking, playing soccer. But the reason why we wandered so much is because all of my friends were busy watching their family's livestock. And that's when it hit me. I needed to be a veterinarian. My professional choice didn't start in kindergarten. It didn't come through a family tradition of one doctor handing it down the mantle to another doctor. It was born for me out of a desire to share the love of Christ. In my mind, I couldn't think of a better way to be like Jesus and take the gospel to anywhere in the world. Because after all, Everyone loves a veterinarian, right? Well, the more I thought about it, the more I realized this has probably never been done before. I'm probably the first one. At least I had never heard about this being done. A veterinary missionary. How odd, right? It wasn't until my first year of vet school at Kansas State I received a letter from a former missionary friend who wanted to introduce me to connect me to a veterinarian in California by the name of Marion Hammerland. Dr. Hammerland was a poultry veterinarian who had also graduated from K-State. He was connected to this organization called the Christian Veterinary Mission. Wow, did that snowball roll downhill really fast from that point forward? It wasn't long before I was on the telephone. I was connected to CVM. I got in touch with their director, Dr. Kit Flowers. Our fellowship group at Kansas State began reading prayer letters from Dr. Brad Fry and his family serving in Rwanda. We eventually invited Dr. Keith Flanagan to come and share with the entire vet school about his and Jan's work in Haiti. Soon I was signed up for a short-term mission trip to Kenya. And then that next year, something amazing happened. The CVM board used to rotate vet schools that they would go to for their board meeting, and they were headed to Kansas that year. Well, when I got wind of that, we decided that maybe our student group would ask if, after all of their meetings, these men and women, veterinarians, followers of Christ, if they would have time for us as students to pray with us, to worship with them, and maybe even share a little wisdom, maybe to give a couple of presentations about what it meant to be a Christian veterinarian. We actually, when the board agreed, we actually invited students from Iowa and Missouri and Illinois and Oklahoma, and they joined us as well, sleeping on the floors of apartments and dorm rooms. It was a great gathering of people, but a whole bunch of folks that were struggling with the exact same question. We were all Christian veterinary students who were asking this question: how exactly do you balance your faith and your profession? Well, that time with the board was absolutely amazing. We heard from so many wonderful speakers sharing about every aspect of veterinary medicine, from equine practice to small animal practice, from AHA certified U.S. clinics to remote bush triage centers. It was just amazing. It was like drinking from a fire hydrant. It was during that time we even got a chance to meet Dr. Leroy Dormany, the founder of the Christian Veterinary Mission. We heard about how God had led him to start the organization back in 1976. I remember something absolutely wonderful that he said, and it stuck with me all of these years. Now, I won't even begin to try to imitate that smooth Georgian accent. Maybe you can picture it in your head. He stood up in front of all of us and he said, "You may be wondering how we can all be so different, and yet at the same time have the ability to share the love of Christ in so many ways and places not available to traditional missionaries." He said, "Do you want to know the secret? The secret is this, that we are followers of Jesus, cleverly disguised as veterinarians." I think it was at that point the light bulb went off in my head and my spirit almost burst out of my chest. It's possible to be both. It's possible to do both well. What I've loved over the years has been the opportunity to sit down with countless numbers of Christian veterinarians to hear their stories about their life struggles and how God has taught them to live well at the intersection of faith and vocation. For me, the highlight of every CVM function is that time at the dinner table when we get to have heart-to-heart fellowship. The best time of every CE conference that I attend is the opportunity to meet new people and share a little bit of life over a cup of coffee or during a break between lectures. And as I think back, though, I can't help but wonder how many other people would have benefited from those conversations. See, not everyone gets a chance to go to every professional meeting, right? Not everyone gets the time to share those moments of pause in the busyness of life to just listen to how others have navigated the rapids of faith and veterinary medicine. But is it possible to make that available? Is it possible to let more people benefit from the life lessons learned by others that have gone through very similar circumstances? So, welcome to Two Roads Crossing. It's an opportunity for veterinary professionals or people who love veterinary professionals, or even aspiring veterinary professionals, to be a fly on the wall for 30 minutes per week, maybe to gain a little bit of insight into how beautifully faith and veterinary medicine fit together. Every week, I'll be talking with a special guest about issues that might be making you scratch your head. We'll discuss different aspects of faith and veterinary medicine that may be causing anxiety in your life. And hopefully, through it all, together, we will learn how to live lives of worship that glorify our God as we use the gifts that He has given to us to live well at the intersection of Two Roads Crossing.
Thank you for listening to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. If you are blessed by this content, like and subscribe so that you are alerted when new content is released. If you would like more information about CVM, or if you have questions, comments, or topical suggestions, you can find us online at www.cvm.org. Or you can contact us by emailing podcast@cvm.org. God has a plan for the nations, and that plan includes you. We pray that CVM has encouraged you to live out your calling with confidence and competence. So, until next time, may the voice of the shepherd ring loud and clear as you follow him in faith to the intersection of Two Roads Crossing.